Would you like to reach our film and TV review podcast audience? Do you have a product or service of interest to film and TV home consumers or followers of the entertainment industry? Have a film or show production to publicize? For affordable price plans for all budgets, get in touch and find out about our introductory advertising options. Reach our audience of film and TV viewers and visit our site contact page at filmandtvreview.com, or you can email us at business@filmandtvreview.com. Reach out today. Welcome to filmandtvreview.com. Catch the latest film, TV and streamed show reviews every week. The views and opinions expressed by the authors and those providing comments are theirs alone. They do not reflect the views, opinions or position of filmandtvreview.com or their respective parent companies or affiliates. Filmandtvreview.com makes no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this program and is for entertainment purposes only. Episodes may contain adult humor and language. For full terms and conditions, see filmandtvreview.com.
Hello there, and welcome to this film and TV special on Revenge of the Sith, which has its anniversary release, so it's 20-year release, basically, 20 years since it came out since, and hit London recently and I guess around the world. Joined today by some regular Star Wars expert aficionados, Sophie and Noelle. Welcome. So just a bit of an introduction. This is obviously a film that George Lucas had, one of the trilogies to bridge that gap between the originals and the prequel movies, the kind of the rise and fall of Anakin. Evening. So you recently saw the showing in London, and how did you see it after seeing so many years? Did it you notice things you didn't see before? What was the experience of that? So, Noelle, what did you find to see?
I liked seeing all the actors' micro expressions and things that you don't really see on a smaller screen. Though I did see this in the cinema about 6 months ago. But I also just noticed like Anakin having not just the scar on his eye, but a scar on his, cheek and things. That's very cool. But all the little details you can get on the big screen, I think is really special.
Did you find, I mean, was there a bit more a move towards a bit more practical effects here than I know it's a lot CG heavy here, but certainly in the Phantom Menace and all that, and that really does to stick out on the big screen as it dates really hugely. But
Yeah,
you
that was the
see,
main issue with seeing this on the big screen is the special effects look very outdated versus if you saw it on your laptop, it wouldn't look as outdated. I thought
Mhm.
Jar Jar for the few seconds he was in it looked fine, but unless it was very dark, the scenes looked a bit dated. But then the practical special effects, the lightsabers, the dueling, Anakin being burnt, that all looked amazing. So.
And Sophie, what kind of popped out for you in this screening, sitting with a big crowd as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was visually dazzling, to be honest. And then seeing it in 4D was really special because, when there'd be a lightsaber fight, you'd see the light along the walls next to you and like on the ceiling. And, when it was snowing, there was actually snow. And when there was like a water fight, it would like splash water at you. It was super intense. And it was like, and the seats were moving back and forth. Actually, Noelle and I were saying it felt like Star Tours at Disney World, which
Exactly,
was
yeah.
quite cool.
And
Uh,
Lindsay, who was sitting next to me, was saying how it reminded him of the Avatar ride in Disney World as well, which also has you
yeah.
moving all over the place.
which is, I think quite good value for £11. It felt like a Disney ride, so that was really cool. And it did actually bring out the film even more for me because I've always found it to be quite an emotional film, quite an evocative film. And when you can see everything in such detail, it just is really moving. And with the surround sound, you feel the score even more intensely. And at the parts that are already quite upsetting, of course, with the younglings and with, the treatment of Padme at the end by Anakin, that all was even more intense, I think, seeing it in the cinema versus, as you said on your laptop, you don't get quite that intensity. Um, I think when it came to the special effects, everything it held up pretty well. There were some minor things like one of the clone troopers looked super off to me, but I never noticed it until I saw it in the cinema. So I think that that's pretty decent for a film that came out 20 years ago. And the color palette of the film is really, really nice, especially when we go to Mustafar. Seeing that in the cinema was just really intense, really cool.
Yeah, that's what I recall as well from when I saw it just a few months before, because they released all the whole trilogy movies all together, and it was that color palette that really, like, this is beautiful looking. You can stop and just look back at the pictures and think this is a beautiful looking film. So, yeah, and it's a good cinema experience. That's what it is. I mean, obviously it's a retrospective, and since you've seen it, it's 20 years ago. What's your perception? Has it changed, or kind of like you appreciate it more or now, or how do you think as it stands up, I suppose, as a retrospective, how does it stand up to its place in Star Wars now? Do you think was this the film that actually sparked that interest in Star Wars? Because I'm guessing you both grew up with when these films were coming out rather than the originals.
Yeah, I grew up with this film and I liked it. I actually didn't really get into Star Wars until I really got into the Clone Wars, which, of course, piggybacks on this story because I like the politics of it. I like the depths of the characters and the motives in what is being shown. I feel like with political movies, especially from the last 20, 30 years, a lot of them are always trying to reference a certain aspect of politics that is only referencing what is happening when the film is made versus this can reference any different point in political history, which I find quite interesting. But the idea of these Jedi who want to travel around and help people, yet they were their own enemy the entire time, basically, I think is quite interesting.
Yeah. It is definitely seems a lot more plot heavy or plot centered as what we're following compared to the originals, where it's kind of a character based story and it's more Luke's journey, and then you get separate everyone into their little B stories or love triangles and all that, and then almost in the background you've got this conflict going on, but here it's definitely heavily plot driven. Throughout those whole three films of the prequels, actually, is you know, well, I guess a science fantasy about someone disrupting trade routes, maybe with taxes or on that. Not that that could ever happen in real life, but then using that as an undercurrent to, dismantle democracy. Again, that could never happen, but it's how do you find this, Sophie? I'm guessing the same question. Did you grow up with these movies, and well, where did Star Wars come alive for you? Or
Yeah, you know what? It was this film that made me fall in love with Star Wars. This film. I had seen all the other ones, so my dad was like, "Don't watch the prequels; they're not worth it." Blah blah blah. And so he only showed me the originals, and I really liked them, but I wasn't like a Star Wars obsessive until I saw Revenge of the Sith. Now I was only 5 when it came out, so I didn't see it in the cinema. I had to come to it later. I think came to it when I was about 14. And I watched that film. Then I read the Darth Plagueis book because I was like, who's this guy? They keep banging on about him. I want to know more. And that really elucidated all of the politics that was in that film. And then I actually ended up, going into politics as a career. I now work in security, and it's just shocking how much of it holds up around the world. I mean, it's actually like I actually had a professor at Cambridge that was like, I just watched the prequels and I think that everyone should watch the prequels. And I wasn't sure if he was serious at first. I thought maybe he was like taking the piss because I had told him I was into Star Wars. And he was like, I'm actually deadly serious right now because this theme of like people sacrificing freedom for security is a historical constant. It always happens. People always do it, and they will continue to do it because there's something human about it. And the films show it in a really almost Shakespearean way. And I think it gives it a timeless quality that'll make it stand up for quite a long time. And it's something that I think generations will come back to. And we've talked about the meetups before, like, would the sequels stand up for generations? I don't know, because they don't really reference a timeless kind of philosophical question like this film does, of like safety versus freedom. So I think it will endure, and I think it should endure.
Yeah. I think the running current in, say, the prequels and the original movies is like, I mean, like Lucas definitely in the back of his mind had it was the Vietnam War, so he had that kind of American politics thread going through it amongst interwoven with everything else, with those timeless, hero's path, journey, Western, samurai, and all that. But you've got this spirit of rebellion, which I guess is especially in 70s America, where you've got, you know, maybe the American politics are now coming under a magnifying glass of corruption. You've got Nixon and all that. And he kind of like hinted maybe, those in power. I think the Emperor and Nixon, those kind of like, he kind of like maybe hinted at that or is in conversations when he's writing stuff. So yeah, you've got this kind of political backbone that's happening in common culture. And then with this, when it came out, obviously it's like 1999 was the Phantom Menace, and then every couple of years you've had this, but it's more relevant now, I see, because we see so much politics, gear shifting um, so fast now. We've had this foundation before, and now we can see how when things shift, how they shift and why they shift, and yeah, as you say, it plays out quite relevant in today's political landscape. What? But mentioned like you've got this emotional undercurrent that you have to play in it. So you've got some of Anakin's kind of like story here, I think, for me, that's his, or you could say maybe Palpatine's rise. For me, I kind of like get what holds it together is definitely a lot of the performances by um who plays the Emperor. Is kind of like he's his kind of, I kind of gravitate to those like, oh, how do they manipulate on how these very subtle little, like boiling a lobster in boiling water. It's like how slowly and how subtle politics gets shifted to in favor of what the ultimate plan is. But emotionally, what is there any kind of what do you latch on to as in performance wise? And you've got um what kind of actors can you think, oh, it's a good performance or stand out for you? Noel, what's kind of like
I think
actors?
Ian McDermott does very well in this movie. I think most of the actors struggle because it's such unique dialogue, and George Lucas is known for being a hands-off director. But the way he does everything with Palpatine, I think, is very well done. Not just as a character, but as a politician, making him seem realistic in that regard. Plus, as this very intelligent, Sith ruler who has learned from his master, I think is quite interesting. I think the subtle scene of Anakin and Padme before he joins Mace Windu, taking down Palpatine. I think that's very good when they're both staring out their windows. I think that's very good. The pain of Ewan McGregor with Anakin this whole time, the kind of denial and sadness with it, you know. We were talking on Friday about how the scene of him playing with the younglings, with his lightsaber at the end of the film, when he's fighting these younglings, he's like toying with them and seeing the kind of, Obi-Wan's reaction to that is so sad. But everyone does the subtle emotions quite well in this when there is subtlety to be had.
Yeah. I think props to Ewan McGregor because he's kind of like complete broken that he's gonna have to do something that he's been called upon or basically no choice because he's always trying to say obviously he grows up with his Padawan, it's Anakin, and then Hayden Christian, who I think does given a bit more range or allowed to do more range in this part is more bit more certainly at the start of the film is more lively, enjoyable, vivacious, and then he has to transcend in that space of a movie to a very dark and broken place, which is over the course of a movie is kind of like a big, huge, a bridge of effects of emotions to go across. And I think it's and I mean back in the it was like back in the day it's like why is he giving it such a flat performance? But he was actually consciously trying to bridge between the Vader voice and this mechanical one and then as a human one, which you know right or wrong choices I don't know, but I think he does an okay job. It's not something that is terrible. Here it definitely comes to the fore in this one, and Ewan McGregor definitely yeah, he doesn't want to fight or kill, but he knows he has to. He's resigned that I'm going to have to end you, then he doesn't want to. And of course, Ian McDermott, yeah, I mean, he's a theatre actor. He's always the top performer for me. So, Sophie, what about for you? What's really kind of like you appreciate the performance of in this final chapter, or even across the prequels? What you can give
Yeah.
props to?
Christopher Lee for me is the standout of this film. I especially seeing it in the cinema this time. The scene where Anakin defeats him and is like cut off both of his arms and is holding the two lightsabers to his throat. And Christopher Lee communicates like five different emotions at the same time within like a couple of seconds. He looks like confused, he looks terrified. He looks like he's trying to understand, like he's almost like calculating. He looks helpless and obviously just totally perturbed. Like he's able to do all of that in the span of just a couple of seconds. I was so shocked when I was rewatching it just on Friday because he's such a fantastic actor, and I'm really glad that they cast him and then Ian McDermott, who are like they come from like a Shakespearean actor background. Particularly Ian McDermott, I think, was in the Royal Shakespeare Company before coming to Star Wars, and I think it's a good idea because it gives the prequels again that feeling of timelessness. Like we've seen it before, but we haven't seen it before. It's like universal and yet particular, kind of balancing all those different things at the same time. And having those actors that bring that in, I think, really brings something to it. And then you do have actors who don't come from the kind of Shakespearean background, but they also really are able to communicate so much. I think Samuel L. Jackson does a great job in this film. I think that he shows this sort of simmering anger and this frustration with Anakin. But then, when Anakin comes to him and tells him about Palpatine, he then kind of looks at him with this level of like earnestness that I never noticed. I have to say, most of the time, I'm a Mace Windu hater. I don't like him. He gets on my nerves. I just think he's too mean all the time.
Me too.
But
He's like that
you
middle
know,
manager everyone hates.
yeah, exactly. He's just too bureaucratic. He like thinks he's just too good. But I actually appreciated him a lot more seeing him in the cinema just because he seemed more nuanced to me. Like he looked like he was legitimately trying his best and he was absolutely bewildered about what's going on, but he's like I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to take it upon myself. And actually I interpreted it more this time as like he didn't want Anakin to go not because he thinks Anakin is like a threat to his position on the council, but more of like he genuinely was like worried about Anakin and thought that Anakin could be like in harm's way. I think when I was able to see his facial expression a bit more in the cinema, he looked a bit more earnest to me. So yeah, those would be the standout people for me.
Yeah. I think they're given a bit more platform here it's just like a really dark tragedy, this one. So you kind of know where it's going. You know it's not going to be a happy ending, but it's kind of like how you get there, and it gives a bit more your pain in their performances, which really sells it here. And I kind of like the film because it definitely. All right, I'm not the biggest prequel fans, but I gotta say, it was a great demonstration of here's this setup that we have, these organizations, this which now stuck in dogma when you really start looking at the fall and the rise of these mythical councils, like hinted at in Star Wars, these 1,000 generations of these very mobile, law peacekeepers. But then, well, let's see why they did for, and it's their own kind of like stuck in their own dogma, and they don't really adapt to what the changing climate, which happens very underneath their noses actually, and they just don't know how to adapt to the situation. And I mean, it's which I think this that was the sequels, well, not the sequels, but rather the originals, and then this. It's always showing a transition of what the status quo, and then how it doesn't quite work, but it's going to have to change. And even like Return of the Jedi, it's this Luke seeing, well, both sides are telling me I'm going to have to kill this person, Vader, who, to face that's my destiny. And then it's the third one where he starts to question both sides, and it says, well, the Emperor wants to kill him, and Yoda wants me to kill him, and then he starts like, well, you know what? Actually, I'm going to choose something else, and in this way, it's in the prequels, it's definitely say, well, look what happened here when your systems fell. And it's a great questioning of, you know, part of the world building that you break it down within these films, which is makes it interesting and, almost educational, I think, as you hinted at before. Um,
Well, I think a lot of like systems and industries do start to collapse within themselves and don't want to change anything, and then just wonder how did this happen when it's like everyone, especially the people below you, were probably telling you
yeah,
what was happening that was wrong, and then you still wonder how this could have happened when it's quite obvious. That's why it's important for characters like Luke or Ahsoka who are more
yeah,
level-headed than the Jedi. We're better Jedi, in my opinion, in a lot of people's opinion.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's always these outsider characters who seem to, like say, Qui-Gon Jinn, he was like, I'm not going to be part of council. I kind of have to follow on a case by case basis what justice is, and it's like this whole samurai kind of a code of conduct where they're not part of a council or organizational body. They kind of like on their own travels as a warrior monk. They see things and they help things on the ground, but they're the ones who's going to see it first. So it's a great examination of that. So you mentioned like obviously it's very emotional film and very yeah, I think so. Out of all of these prequels, it's definitely heavy on the emotions, but um I think we mentioned maybe that how important the soundtrack is in this one. I think for me, Duel of Fate was a really great one from this era or the prequels, but in this film, what's kind of like I guess you've seen it in the cinema, what really hits you with the soundtrack in this and this part? So Noel, what did you really feel added a lot or like
I think the soundtrack adds a lot. I know everyone loves the music of Star Wars, and we all think that John Williams is the one who really has made this franchise and other franchises work so well. But I think the music helps with the emotions more than anything else because the characters just kind of flatly say what they're feeling, which is not really what people do unless they're in therapy. So I think it adds a lot of emotions with that, and you have like this fate that's really going on. And it's not just the war, it's not just Anakin and Padme's relationship, it's a whole galaxy, you know. And then you feel bad because Palpatine is using this scary time to have people give him powers, which is sad for people in the whole galaxy. They have thousands of systems in that Senate. And then you have the fact that Luke and Leia will eventually put this down and then it'll come back up, which is my main reason why I don't like the sequels, is because it kind of undoes all the work that everyone in the galaxy has done, starting with Padme and Mon Mothma, going all the way to Luke and Leia. So it's just very emotional because it's like a world war or galactic war, basically, that affects everyone. And the Clone Wars does this really well. Well, they don't just talk about the Jedi and the clones who are struggling, but also like the average people who are trying to live their daily lives in a war. And the fact that Anakin didn't have to lose anything, but because the Jedi were not supportive of him, he felt like he would always he turned to the dark side because they were the only people offering to help him, basically.
Sophie, for you, kind of same question. How do you find the soundtrack? Really, any high points in this
Yeah,
one? Favorites for you, or even across the prequels?
yeah. Well, what I love about the soundtrack, throughout Star Wars is that it really drives the characters forward. So many of the characters have their own themes that kind of that they encapsulate their personalities and what they might be doing. So, in the originals, I loved Leia's theme, for example, because I think it really encapsulates her. And so within this film, Grievous has his own theme, which is quite playful and fun and a bit like silly. And and you wouldn't expect that really from a villain, and especially not like a hulking villain. But, we mentioned the Clone Wars earlier. You can see when you watch the Clone Wars just how silly Grievous really is, like how you're almost like laughing at him most of the time. And I think in the film as well, you're kind of laughing at him most of the time. And so his theme really encapsulates that and adds that level of playfulness that is something I really love about Star Wars that George Lucas always has done in his films. They've had a level of silliness and playfulness. And then you have the really intense darkness of Palpatine's theme, and particularly when they're playing it during the Darth Plagueis scene, that's always so haunting for me, just like the really intense operatic voices. It always really just freaks me out. Like I remember when I watched that for the first time, I was really freaked out at that point. Even though they're just like sitting there having a conversation, it's creepy. It's really well done. And then I think that also, in addition to characterization, the music gives it a level of continuity as well. So the film gets, obviously very, very depressing. But then it ends with, hope with Leia and Luke. And each one of them, as they're handed over to their respective adopted parents, they get their theme played. And I always found that to be so beautiful. And it kind of ends what's been almost like honestly a horrific film, like horrifically, like it makes you feel horrific at least. It then ends it on a positive note as you're sort of reminded that there is hope. So I think it kind of weaves the threads of Star Wars together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
To
yeah, it
see
does.
what you said, sorry, real quick about Leia's theme. I also love Leia's theme, and I think it's so underrated because everyone
Yeah,
loves Duel of Fates and other songs. So
yeah. It's so beautiful. It's got this softness, but also this strength, and I think it's so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these scenes where there is, if you even just turn the sound on, there's no dialogue going, and especially when you've got the raid at the temple and you've got Anakin and Padme looking. Then now you can see their worlds are shifting from as they're looking at the landscape, and then you've got it's basically just music there, and so you a lot of the internal monologue is done via music, which props to. I mean, across all these films, it's the music plays such an important part in this, which I think more so than you see with other movies. Strangely enough, or maybe I just don't notice it, but um, definitely all the conflicting and rising emotions is done, via these melodies or this kind of like orchestral kind of not even the not the very subtle ones. Also, it's all kind of like written in there. Kind of brings me to the next question, Laurie. For you, what are the standout scenes for this? I mean, kind of like, yeah, it's like you probably reclip online if you were doing that. What about Noel? What about for you if you'd pick up maybe one or two scenes that really can like you love to death?
I there's a couple scenes. The first one is when Mace Windu and Palpatine are fighting, and Anakin's, trying to reason with Mace Windu, telling him not to, kill Palpatine. I think that scene is so good just because the whole scene, I think, is done so well. I didn't even notice the CGI because everything is just done so well. We were mentioning on Friday also the window, how it breaks open in that scene. Cool. I also like Order 66, though I do think it's better when you go on YouTube and see the compilations of Order 66s from all of the Star Wars, medias. But the other scene I like in this movie is I think the first 30 minutes are so good. And I'm quite sure that Dave Filoni saw that and said, I'm going to make a show that has this vibe to it. Because if the whole movie had a similar vibe to that of the rescuing Palpatine and them having to work together and improvise, that I think is very cool. I wish more Star Wars would be like that. So.
What about you, Sophie?
So the first scene, which I mentioned a bit earlier, is Dooku's fight and death. I think the acting in that scene is just on point. And I love the lightsaber battle. I think it's so good. I love watching like Christopher Lee's lightsaber battles. I love that in Attack of the Clones as well. His fights. I mean, he got to fight everyone in that film. It was Anakin and then Obi-Wan and then ultimately Yoda, which was just epic. And so then watching him come back again, and then Anakin being like, "My powers have doubled since the last time we met, Count." I was so excited about that, and then it's epic. It's just so cool. And when Anakin like catches the lightsaber in his other hand, I don't know. I always found that to be so like pleasing. Like it's so smooth. So I love that. And then I think the other standout scene for me is Palpatine declaring like the reorganization of the Republic into the First Galactic Empire. That scene is just it just felt like, especially like as someone who works in politics, like that is how you would do it, right? You would turn the people that you everyone felt like they could rely upon into the villains and then scapegoat them, continue to give yourself more and more power, and then eventually look as if you yourself have sacrificed something. So Palpatine's like, this attempt on my life has left me scarred and deformed. He's able to use that as kind of street cred to be like, I've been on the front lines dealing with these people. And then you give them the kicker, and what more can people do about it? And then Padme's reaction, it was one of my, I mean, her line there, "This is how liberty dies with thunderous applause," is one of my favorite lines throughout Star Wars. And it's right, I think that scene was so, it's like, it's not a long scene, but I think that there's quite a lot in it.
Yeah.
I think that's also one of the best quotes in cinema because I think it's just done so well. And again, it applies to all levels of politics, not just 2005 politics. So,
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a universal line now. For me, I guess actually, for me, yeah, different from you guys. I think definitely in the opera where you've got Ian McDermott basically or Palpatine giving a whole kind of like seduction of Anakin, as in what I can offer you, or what the Jedi, kind of turning him now from the stoic Jedi now to, well, the other side of thinking, and maybe things are grey and not black and white, and what I can offer you. And it is and it's done by a story, basically. It's like a story, but here's what I'm going to impart to you. And it's called this whole kind of metaphor thing. And it's just basically two people in a chair talking, and that's like 3 minutes. You do that in a big sci-fi adventure or a big it's where would you do that? And it's great. And I think what in my mind's eye also another one I guess is very short, kind of like just for the angst. It's like I suppose with Ewan McGregor on top, Mustafa, where you're a brother to me, and then it's like it's where look, he's so angry to himself what he's had to basically kill his, pseudo son or Padawan or whatever, and it is under, and he's basically look what you're gonna have to make me do, and he's so crushed inside, which kind of I think then leads him to retreat for the next, he's quite happy then being a kind of like silent guardian on Tatooine later, and he's got a lot to reflect on. I know they did the series where he kind of like he has to, he's has to resolve what happened, a complete failure now of everything that he's believed in, and a friendship also. So those two kind of stand out for me. What did you think of the actual final fight itself? Because traditionally every Star Wars movie you got a climactic lightsaber fight, and this was given, oh, this is going to be the longest one. It's huge. What did you personally actually think of the saber fight at the end? I've got my own thoughts on it, but what about you guys?
I think it's good, but I think it goes on for a bit too long. And this the version we see in cinemas is actually the condensed version of what Lucas originally wanted for it. I think the Clone Wars does better lightsaber dueling scenes. But I think that Ewan and because Ewan and Hayden
Eden.
did their own stunts, it makes all the difference because I think it's cooler when people do their own stunts, even though they used a double for Count Dooku because, Christopher Lee was so old. I still think that looked quite good. I think all the fights in the movie look good, but I do think the final scene, I've just seen other better fights in the Clone Wars, but because that's animated, they can do those things a lot easier than you can with real people. But I do think it gets to a point where it gets a little ridiculous, and I don't like that they also combine it at first with the Palpatine sort of fight as well. They either put that towards the end where it gets a bit boring, or put that before, but the
Yeah.
pacing of this movie we all know is a bit rocky compared to other Star Wars installments.
Yeah, Sophie, I'm guessing you actually probably prefer the fight at the beginning rather than the climax, or what's your take or opinion?
Yeah, yeah, I was just about to say that it's the fight between Obi-Wan and Anakin is cool, but as Noel said, it's too long, and I think it's not quite as visually interesting. Partially, it's the obvious thing of it being two blue lightsabers,
Mm,
and that's not going to be as nice to look at compared to when there's that contrast. So, I think like Mace Windu's fight with Sidious looks quite cool, and the fight with Count Dooku, not just because of the color of his lightsaber, but also like the shape of the lightsaber is cool. And then I think the best one throughout the prequels is the Duel of the Fates with Darth Maul, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan. And visually, that's definitely the coolest one because you've got the double-bladed one going against a green lightsaber and a blue one, and it just looks quite cool. Um, I think that also Yoda's fight with Sidious in that film wasn't didn't really do it for me either, even though it visually was cool and I liked how they did it in the Senate. I felt like I don't know, I just didn't find Ian McDiarmid to be as interesting to watch in terms of his fighting compared to some other people. But yeah, so I felt like Anakin and Obi-Wan just I think the backdrop was cool having it on Mustafar, but the actual fight itself, there were some really silly parts. Like there's one part of them where they're like they're swinging their lightsabers, but the lightsabers don't even hit each other. And then I just every time I watch that, I just burst out laughing because I'm just like, what was the point there? And some points they just stop using lightsabers for like kicking each other, and I'm just like, guys, like, come on. So yeah, that's not my favorite one.
I also
mm,
like with the Senate how it's like very representative of the government being, bastardized basically. Just, in the fight scene. They're basically I like just the,
the
metaphor
visual.
of it all.
Yeah, yeah.
That's true. Just chucking essentially where the Senate platforms at each other to show his absolute disdain for democracy. That's a really good point.
I,
Thanks.
yeah. I think the strengths of the best fights are the ones where you got this emotional through line going, or it's a dialogue, and it is a conflict of tensions and emotions are really on high. It's and they vocalize it. It's basically use this mechanism of a dialogue, and like I guess for me, if overall Star Wars would be Empire Strikes Back for me because it is a such a undercurrent what's going on there. But with the prequels, Kenobi, who we traditionally knows as a very two people on the same level, just taking it out each other. I probably agree with you. So in the beginning of the film, you've got this as a vehicle for rage. and maybe the dark side. It has a purpose, those fights, or those conflicts, compared to this where you kind of like it's just one against the other. But yeah,
And
go
if
on.
I could just add one more thing there, just your point about it kind of being quite evenly matched with Anakin and Obi-Wan, I think is a great point. And I think that's part of the issue with why that fight isn't as interesting to watch, is because they both have the same lightsaber technique. And it makes sense. I mean, Obi-Wan trained Anakin, so and that's the only reason probably why he, compared to really anyone else, could hold his own against Anakin at his most powerful. Because I would say that probably Anakin's at his most powerful before he's got to be Darth Vader and he's inhibited by the suit there, but he's like giving himself to the dark side. But because Obi-Wan knows his technique and can match him, for every move, it's kind of like it's just not as interesting to watch. Whereas if you watch, Darth Maul versus Qui-Gon versus Obi-Wan, Obi-Wan, as you say, it's quite measured, and then he gives himself over, which is super interesting to watch. Qui-Gon is such a maverick, you never know what the next thing he's going to do. So he's really cool to watch as well. And, of course, played by an incredible actor. And then Darth Maul's technique was unlike anything we had ever seen in Star Wars and was super unique. And Ray Park, of course, doing his own being, I think, from a stunt background before he came, and he was a mixed martial artist as well. So seeing him was just, absolutely dazzling. So I think that's what it is. It's just Anakin and Obi-Wan using the same technique, matching each other for each move. It's just not quite as interesting.
Yeah. I think, yeah, it's telling of the character there when he's saying I think Obi-Wan is apparently a very defensive fighter, so he's just waiting for you to make that mistake and then he'll do it. So it kind of informs the characters as I kind of like that. It's that final move that is more exciting than the whole preamble, which, as you say, goes on for too long. But yeah. All right. Well, okay. So I mean, okay. Well, I mean, this whole prequel's a bit of a roller coaster of highs and lows, really. And what would you change it? I mean, how would you if you were like go back in time and would you have changed? How would you have changed or anything of those prequels or order or maybe the what you'd cut out or the actors or anything like that? Is there what doesn't stand out so well or would you want to change, if
I
any?
think we needed a whole Clone Wars, episode, so to speak, because it was such a good show. And I feel like Phantom Menace is not fully necessary to understand what was happening. Everything in Phantom Menace you can talk about without showing. But that's a problem with George, is he tells, not shows. And, that kind of goes against filmmaking. So I think if you had Anakin coming from this rough background and Palpatine being there for him, and during the Clone Wars he matures, but it's not enough because the Jedi Council still doesn't help him. And maybe just explain some things better. Like, Padme doesn't die of sadness. She dies because Palpatine drains her life force and gives it to Anakin. The reason why Anakin's upset about not becoming a master is because if he was a master, he would have access to Jedi archives that would have allowed him to get information so Padme could live. But these things are just not explained, and so they're memed into oblivion. But I think there needs to be some more explanation there, and I think we need something like the Clone Wars to help, bridge the gap between, the war itself and the end of the war. So.
Sophie, what do you think is pretty much lacking? And those kind of things that Noel raised, or would you kind of
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that the Clone Wars needed to be shown much more, that it's not really helpful when you've got with the second film, it gives you the lead up and then you just don't see any of the war, and then you go to Revenge of the Sith and the war's over. And I think that that's the big issue with that, in my opinion, because I'm always more of like a character focused person. That's always what I'm really interested in when it comes to films. Is that you're kind of missing out on some of the characters. I think this is always the most frustrating thing for me when it came to the prequels, is like in the first one, you're given this really ridiculously interesting character of Darth Maul, but then they cut out all of his dialogue, and so he's only saying two things and then he dies. And it's like, okay. And then, Dooku as well. He's really, really interesting. And then, 30 minutes in Revenge of the Sith, he dies. And it's just kind of like, then it's totally reliant on external shows and things like that to bridge the gaps, which films shouldn't be. I don't think that they should be totally reliant on that. You should be able to watch them by themselves. It always just on a personal level puts me in a really awkward spot when I talk to people about the prequels and they're like, "Oh, well, what was the point of this person or that person?" And then I'm like, "Well, if you watch the Clone Wars," and then I'm like, "Oh, Sophie, like you can't just tell someone to spend like hours and hours watching this other show to make a film good?" So that's the thing. That's the thing. They needed to spend more time with the characters. And I think one thing that stood out to me a lot with Revenge of the Sith specifically was I felt like it was super out of nowhere when Anakin starts choking Padme and then she dies from that. I They did allude to it a bit in the Clone Wars show about where his jealousy and rage towards Padme. There were a few arcs that were quite good about that. But if you hadn't seen any of that, at least to me, it would have been like, this is the guy that's been like absolutely busting his ass to try and save Padme this entire film, and then he's just gonna start choking her out of nowhere. Like, what? I thought that was insane when I was rewatching it this time. That was so I felt like a lot of their relationship is quite badly done in the prequels.
Mm.
Obviously the clunky, like poorly written romantic dialogue doesn't help, but I think that they needed to show kind of where the relationship was fraying as well if they're going to have him do a violent act towards her like that, and then that partially lead to her death.
I think, yeah, they're kind of like some small scenes where Obi-Wan, which you see later on online, it's kind of like, oh, he did talk to Padme, and then then Anakin says, oh, Obi-Wan was here. So it's kind of like hint, oh, there's some jealousy or there's something going on there which could help lead to it, but it needs to be organically fill in those parts, which doesn't. Yeah, it feels like, oh, we're missing something here. So,
Well, in
um,
the original drafts of the script, Anakin thought Obi-Wan was having an affair with Padme. So maybe that's where some of it comes. But it does come out of like nowhere, his
yeah.
rage towards her. Like, yeah, it's very weird. Especially when she could have like I hate when in film and television when a simple sentence could totally change the whole plot. If she had just been like, "Oh, he jumped a ride on my private jet," he'd be like, "Oh, okay." And that's it. Also, how did they not know that she was pregnant? Like the whole pregnancy thing, like if you had told me, "Oh, she's giving birth like 6 months early," then we would be like, "Oh, that's why he didn't understand there were twins and all this." But it's just done so clunkily. And her scenes that got deleted with Mon Mothma, very weird. But also, I would like to say like Darth Jar Jar thing I think would have been interesting, but that's like a whole separate, you
Yeah.
know.
I was almost secretly hoping just to give
One
him his
of one of us would bring
due.
up Darth Jar
We
Jar.
had
Yeah.
to, I suppose. It does it does like the devil plays the best trick, that you don't believe in him, and yeah, just to give because he of course disappears, but hashtag save Jar Jar. Yeah, but justice for Jar Jar. But it is yeah, I mean it's I'm thinking now, of course, its legacy. I think it did throw open a lot of these other series, the Clone Wars and all this kind of thing. So, kudos to that, to actually opening up these little eras and to kind of like open up these little scenarios and conflicts and all that, and TV series and all that. So it kind of gave that whole franchise a bit more huge lease of life afterwards. But you think we've lost that now with the with Disney and all that? Anything that you miss about? Is there something you can definitely see there's a complete difference now or shift or between what we have now? Because we're obviously since then we've had the sequels. I mean, where does it rank for you, this prequels with now 9 films, let's say? So Noel, I mean, where does this sit with you with Star Wars and the
I think
Disney
Revenge of
one?
the Sith is my favorite. I think this and Attack of the Clones have so many good parts that the bad parts kind of even out the score, compared to the original trilogy, which consistently is good throughout the whole film.
Hmm.
But I like just the feel of this. It's a unique environment. It has unique storytelling areas and things like that. The look of it, I think, is very unique. The futuristic aspects of it. So I'd say Revenge of the Sith is my favorite Star Wars film, and then Attack of the Clones will be around the top five as well. Phantom Menace, though, that is a sludge to get through.
Okay. Are you, Sophie? How does this rank for you in since 20 years since of Star Wars? Where does this sit with
Yeah.
you?
Um, Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope are tied for me as my favorites.
Oh.
For very different reasons. I think that Revenge of the Sith is just very, very compelling in terms of plot, in terms of all of the politics, and it's just really hard for me to like look away when I watch that film. Whereas A New Hope, it's just like the characters are really fantastic, especially Leia. She was always really inspirational to me. And it just started it all, so that one's always going to be very special for me. In terms of answering your other question about Disney, I think Disney has the potential to do something great because they have done a few great things with Star Wars. They did the last season of the Clone Wars, which absolutely blew me away.
Mhm.
That was just incredible. And totally captured what it needed to capture and beyond, and totally filled in the gaps of the characters. So I absolutely love that. They're doing Andor, which is consistently very, very good. But I think the thing that Disney often misses is kind of the world building and the quirkiness that Star Wars has, especially under Lucas. And them not involving him enough, it shows, I think, when it comes to kind of just the essence of Star Wars, which I think is the depth of the world and the silliness and quirkiness. I think that The Last Jedi, though it was a really bad film, it did have that level of like quirkiness and interesting world building, but it didn't really have anything else. So at least they can do it. But it's gonna be if they could unite something that's like very well acted and has very great characters like Andor with the quirkiness and world building and fun that they had in The Last Jedi, then I think they could do something like the prequels
Mm.
or the originals. But I don't think they have done that yet because with Andor, for example, the tone is just so dark and intense and brooding. And it just gets, for me, it gets almost tiresome to watch it, even though it's such an excellent show, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is just depressing. And it's just not, it doesn't feel like Star Wars at some points. So I'd like to see a show that was quirky and fun, but also really felt like Star Wars and really had something to say. Skeleton Crew is a bit like that, but I don't think was like an amazing, amazing show. But I think that they could do it. I hope that they try to.
Yeah. It's a bit of a balancing act when you've got this kind of a deep thread of politics and then world building, quirkiness, light and dark. It's all in one kind of like running time almost with the movies. But yeah. Okay, yeah, I mean, and as a prequel, not a huge fan when it came out. Obviously, it was like, oh, but yeah, as time goes on, I really do start appreciating where the linchpin of where it is, where the Star Wars world building is in these three movies, quite honestly, for the next, 20 years that came afterwards. But yeah, okay, something I appreciate. It's like a wine with time. Anyway, well, anyway, I think that's a good point, though, as in a good summary of Revenge of the Sith 20-year anniversary. I'd like to thank Noel and Sophie for joining me for this episode. See you next time.
We hope you enjoyed this film and TV review.com episode. Catch the latest film and TV reviews, together with regular episode content from the world of film and TV every week. See you soon. Would you like to reach our film and TV review podcast audience? Do you have a product or service of interest to film and TV home consumers or followers of the entertainment industry? Have a film or show production to publicize? For affordable price plans for all budgets, get in touch and find out about our introductory advertising options. Reach our audience of film and TV viewers and visit our site contact page at filmandtvreview.com, or you can email us at business@filmandtvreview.com. Reach out today.